Number one is you must be normal. That is to say, you must conform. You must at least pretend to be normal, even if you're not normal. You can't get up and walk around. You got to sit right here in this spot because, well, that's what people do. That's good behavior. Well, that's one of the things that people with Asperger syndrome need to challenge. You know, these social norms that we have to go along with the way that the overwhelming majority of the world's population expects us to be like. Well, be like what? Be like them, neurotypicals. The problem is, it's not always possible. Now, this afternoon, my wife went to the hospital for an outpatient procedure, and I was there with her, obviously, and my job, my responsibility, was to sit in the waiting room and watch television with the other spouses, which coincidentally happened to be a couple of the men, waiting for their wives, I assume, and that was the normal thing to do. I don't know about you, but I can't sit for an hour with television annoying me, and it's very difficult for me to do. The other guys didn't seem to have a problem with it. In fact, they seemed to have a problem with me because I didn't want to sit there. I wanted to get up and walk around. Well, in today's environment, health environment, you're not supposed to walk around a hospital because you're spreading germs, I guess, or bugs or something. I can't say what it's called because YouTube will ding you if you even mention it. But that is normal for them. Now, fortunately, nobody called me out on it, but I'm assuming that a security guard could have come down and said, hey, you need to get back in your box. You need to sit in a chair here and behave yourself like normal people. Well, who gets to decide what is and what is not normal? I was looking at a photograph just to illustrate this principle, but I was looking at a photograph on the internet, and it was taken, I don't know, maybe back in the 1870s, I'm guessing, maybe earlier than that. And these were apparently railroad workers who had finished their job, and two railroads had come together, and they were posing by the trains, and it was an interesting photograph to see how these people dressed, what was considered the norm back then. Now, it appears that the photograph was taken in the summertime. I don't know that it was, but I'm just assuming because that's when people tended to work outside. And I noticed how these people were dressing. I mean, the style, the thing that was considered to be the norm. And the norm is they were all wearing long sleeves, and they were all wearing what appears to be some kind of an overcoat. They were all wearing long pants, and they were all wearing hats. Then I was looking at another photograph that was taken in the 1920s, and again, looking at how men dressed. And it was pretty much the same thing, only the styles were different. But, I trying to think of something to call these things, and so I decided to call them male burqas because everything was covered except for their face. But in the 1920s version, something had changed. Now they were wearing these straw hats, those flat hats. I call them Buster Keaton hats. I don't know what, I think they had a term for them. I don't know what it was. But the point is that we as human beings tend to conform to the norm. Whatever the norm happens to be, that is something that we want to conform to. Because I guess it's easy for people to conform to the norm. And they want to. They want to be accepted. But Aspies, we have this choice. The choice is to be accepted as normal and to have to put up with the discomfort of the sights and sounds and just the socializing to be accepted, or we could choose not to be accepted and to be relieved of all of these sensory input that drives us absolutely positively crazy. So what I'm saying is maybe we need to just challenge the norm, or at least question the norm, because if it causes stress, if it causes anxiety, that translates often into health problems. So sometimes just being what they think is weird is actually healthy for us. And keep this thought in mind always. Everybody is abnormal. Everyone has something that is not fitting with everyone else. So the way that I like to phrase it is, you've heard me say many times, it is normal to be abnormal. So if you are abnormal, don't worry about it. You're normal. Number two is this. What I call, for lack of a better term, just fitting the Aspie stereotype. We need to, really question that. What exactly is the Aspie stereotype? Well, I was reading an article on the internet. I spent a lot of time on the internet reading articles and looking at photographs of people that were taken decades ago. But anyhow, I was reading this article, and he was using the term, I thought, first time I saw it, I thought it was spurg, talking about people spurging. I thought, what is, it's spurging. And I think what the author of this article is trying to say is there are some people who go on rants, like people with Asperger syndrome. So that was a stereotype that needs to be challenged. And I understand what they're saying. I've had times when, really not temper tantrums, but, when you have these meltdowns and people misunderstand what's happening here. They think you're angry, but you're really not. It's just, the pressure is built up and out it comes. And usually it's not harmful. It doesn't hurt anybody. It just looks weird to people. I mean, when I see somebody having a meltdown, I think it's weird. And it's been a long time since I've done that. But yeah, I have done it in the past, so I understand. But the problem is that stereotype, that what is Asperger syndrome? Well, that's where you blow your cool. That's where you have a meltdown. It's where you talk senseless, according to neurotypical people. I think that stereotype needs to be questioned because it just doesn't fit. It's kind of like saying all men wear flat top hairstyles. Because I once saw a guy with a flat top hairstyle. Come to think of it, the only time I see somebody wearing a flat top hairstyle, it's always been a man. Not true, not true today as it used to be. But is that a correct stereotype? I don't think so. But what is a person with Asperger syndrome? Ask that question to the average man or woman on the street, and chances are you will get some very bizarre answers that don't fit reality. How do you overcome that? Well, I'm not sure that you can, because it's just not something that the media cares to talk about. It's not news. It's certainly not hot news by any means. May make for an interesting TV program, maybe a documentary or something, but by and large, people just don't care enough, so that's going to be a tough one to overcome. Number three is this: you must get married. How do you deal with that? And why should we question it? Well, again, this is one of those things that is not true today as it was back in my younger years. I'm pushing 70, as you know. I've been there, seen that, seen a thing or two, learned a thing or two from experiencing a thing or two, and I'm trying to share with you what I've learned over the years. That's why I'm doing these videos. But there was this pressure, particularly on women, that if you're not married by such and such age, you're a flawed person. Now, I'm an advocate of traditional families. I'm an advocate of marriage. For me, it's been a very good thing. We've been married going on 50 years now. I mean, not quite, but it's, we don't fight. I mean, we just never have, that I can remember. I'm sure she's been mad at me a few times, like the time I went out and mowed the grass when I got home from surgery. But, we have our complications, but I think marriage is a wonderful thing. But are you flawed because you don't want to get married, or because you've never met the right person? Or maybe because you have personality, let's call them personality distinctives, that don't mesh well with others. So you remain single. I think that's okay. I really don't understand why people with Asperger syndrome should feel pressured into getting married when they're doing perfectly fine, living all by themselves. or maybe some other living arrangement. I know some Aspies who stay with their parents for a very, very, very long time. I mean, into middle age and beyond, sometimes until their parents pass away. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, it depends on the individual. If it's mutually beneficial, if a person with Asperger syndrome is living with his or her parents well into their adulthood, and if they're helping around the house, taking care of chores, they have a job maybe, and they're helping to pay the bills, it's not just a tenant, but it's a tenant in most circumstances that you can trust. Somebody you have and taking care of you and watching after you, and you're kind of a benefit to your parents for security reasons. Somebody's less likely to break into a house or invade a home when there's a younger adult or middle-aged adult around to cause them problems. So why do we have this odd thing about people who live in their mother's basement or their mother's attic? It could be a perfectly logical, reasonable arrangement. Plus, it's less expensive for everybody involved. So that's another one of those social norms we probably ought to challenge. At least we ought to question them. It's not written in stone anywhere that a child has to move, or an offspring, I should say, no longer a child, has to move out of the house by the time they are 18 years old, and if they're 28 years old, I mean, they're overstaying their welcome. Not true. Sometimes it is, obviously, but other times it's extremely beneficial. Number 4, and I kind of like this one, number 4, something we need to challenge is that people with Asperger syndrome should go to college. Got to get that university degree. Nobody's going to hire you. That's what they tell you. No one is going to hire you unless you have a college degree. I have been amazed at how many people have gotten jobs who don't have college degrees. I think it was Elon Musk who mentioned one time that diplomas don't impress him at all. He's more focused on, and this is something I've heard, I've never actually heard him say that kind of secondhand information, but he wants to see somebody who can produce. Who can produce better than an Aspie? Well, sometimes they can, but usually Aspies are very focused, they're very knowledgeable, they are self-taught. There's a word for that. I can't think what it is off the top of my head. Auto something. Autodidactic, does that sound right? Yeah, somebody who is self-taught. That tends to describe a lot of people with Asperger syndrome. Nothing wrong with going to college. I'm not trying to diss that or discourage anyone from doing that. If you are proficient in academics, that could be the right path for you to take. But because it is the right path for some people to take, it's not the right path for everybody to take. And because Aspies tend to struggle with social environments, and it's hard to imagine what is more social than a college. Now, you go to high school, there's a lot of peer pressure there. But at the end of the day, you get to go home, right? Well, if you're living on campus or near campus, you don't get to go home. That is your home all day long. And, I went to college for a few years, and what I discovered was that the difference between college kids and high school kids is parents aren't there to keep track of their kids. That's pretty much the difference. I mean, some of these guys, they're just unhinged. You think by the time a guy is 18, 19, 20 years old, he would have matured. Well, guess what? Turns out the human brain does not mature until you're around age 25. Most of the college kids are not yet at that point and stage in their life. They have not matured. Not necessarily a good place for a person with Asperger syndrome. Now, again, not discouraging anybody. Could be perfect arrangement for you, and don't want to discourage anybody from doing that. But if I were going to go to college, I think I would be more apt, particularly in this environment, because the technology is there, to go to an online college or take online courses. Why not? Work your own pace. You're learning, which is why you go to college, why you're supposed to go to college. Some people, go to college just to, I don't know, I guess they like to go in debt. I don't know why they go to a physical school. But yeah, there's an option there for Aspies. Number 5 is that it is required that everyone should settle on a specific career path. Where do we get that? Well, I think we get it maybe from, in ages past, it was pretty much what you had to do. I mean, if you were a peasant and you were working for the owner of the property, you didn't have any choices. You couldn't buy property, so that was your job. And you would be something equivalent to a share farmer, sharecropper. You would get paid a percentage of the produce of the land upon which you worked. You didn't have an option. And then they had trades, where people would engage in a trade, and maybe somebody, for example, would be, I don't know, maybe be a carpenter, or maybe be what do you call people who make shoes? Cobbler. Yeah, that would be your trade. And so, as a young person, you would go and you would work for somebody else, apparently for next to nothing, and you would go through that tenure of learning, and that was your school. And so that's the only thing you knew, and so that's what you did your entire life. And we follow that all the way through the Great Depression, 1930s, where jobs were a commodity, and not everybody could get employment. So you would seek out anything you could possibly get, and you would cling to that, because sometimes it was the difference between life and death, or at least being able to put food on your table. So yeah, I could understand why people would want to cling to a specific career path, but I don't think that is the environment in which we are in today. So if you change careers, I don't think that necessarily means you're unstable, in fact, or unhinged. It just simply means that you're not attached to a specific career path when there are other paths available to you. I know that I was a pastor for like 12 years. I enjoyed it, but there came a point in time where I started a business, and the business was relatively successful. I was able to live on the income, take care of my family, provide for my retirement, so forth and so on. So I just changed careers. I don't know, what was I, 35 years old or so? And it worked out very well until I retired. And now what do? Well, I sit around and talk to you all day. That's what I do now. But yeah, if I had to settle on a career, I would have had a single career. I would have had a very miserable existence. Now, I want you to go back and think about what was your first job. What if you had to be stuck doing that the entirety of your life? First job I can remember working was, got a job 16 years old in a grocery store. Just to give you an idea of what it was like back then, there was this huge sign on the front of the grocery store that said they were hiring 16-year-old boys. Now today that would be illegal. You can't say you're just hiring boys. Back in that day and age, there was this restaurant chain called Burger Chef. I've mentioned that before. Have you ever been to Burger Chef? Well, there was a time when they only hired males because, well, they were chefs. I guess there were women chefs, but apparently they didn't know that. But it was part of the theme. So they would only hire males. Can't do that nowadays. But the point is, if I had stuck with my original career, guess I'd still be stocking shelves, working the cash register, if they even have those anymore, sweeping the floors, doing whatever you do in a grocery store. That's kind of a dumb idea. If you can find a career path that is better for you than what you've been doing in the past or what you're doing now, what's the problem? So I think people with Asperger syndrome need to understand that this notion that society tries to force upon us and others, that if you're not stuck to a specific career, that you are somehow unstable. Not necessarily so. Now, if you change careers every 6 months, a lot of people with Asperger syndrome have a real problem keeping a job. And I know for the first, till I was in my well, probably till I was like 30 years old, I had a tough time finding gainful employment. In my early 20s in particular, and that was tough. When you first married, got a little baby, and you have the social pressure, you just can't hold down a job because, well, you do the job well. They don't like you because you're weird, you're a little odd, you know what I mean? So on you go. Well, that's something that we need to challenge. And the other thing is kind of an encapsulating of all the things we talked about up to this point, and that is the prevailing view is necessarily always right. Now stop and think about that for a second. Is it conceivably possible that the prevailing view is right because, well, that's what the majority thinks? And if you don't go along and wear your hat and your overcoat in the summertime and never wear shorts or short sleeves, which I don't, by the way, anyhow, because I think they're uncomfortable. But, or if you don't wear this flat straw hat because that is the style, or you don't believe what everyone else is believing at the moment or what you're expected to believe, that just doesn't work. I mean, culture to culture, people have different kinds of beliefs, and age to age, people have different beliefs. Our beliefs changed. We're influenced by everything from television to the teacher, by our parents. If I had grown up in India instead of Indiana, I probably would not have grown up a Baptist. I'd probably grown up, what do they have in India? Buddhist? Whatever, you know. And so who gets to say that the norm is the correct path to take? How do you know that what is considered abnormal? Okay, we're thinking people with Asperger syndrome. Just because everyone doesn't think the way that we do, or doesn't think the way that we do, or they don't necessarily behave the way we do, because they have a typical way of thinking and a typical way of behaving, that necessarily means that they are right. I think people with Asperger syndrome, deep down inside, they know, okay, that can't be right. But still, the social pressure for conformity often leads to stress, anxiety, and as we said earlier, that many times translates into even physical problems, physical illnesses. We need to be aware, consciously aware of the fact that being abnormal, based upon what neurotypicals define as normal, is not necessarily right. Just because it's normal, the norm, doesn't mean it's correct. We need to take those two terms and just divorce them, separate them totally, completely. Correctness and normalcy rather, just not the same. Just absolutely, positively not the same. That is something that we really need to question. And you see on your screen those two rectangles? Well, if you want the conversation to keep on going, let's keep on talking. The way to do that is click one of those rectangles and we just keep going. If not, well, thanks for stopping by, and we will see you all next time.